The night I came back, the whole neighborhood froze. It was raining, cold rain that slapped against my skin like needles, as I stood there in front of the old house, the house where my own son had buried me alive 11 years ago. The brick wall that had once sealed me away was gone now, but I could still remember the rough scrape of cement dust against my nose, the choking smell, the echo of my son's voice as he sealed the last brick. "It's better this way, Mother. Forgive me." I had screamed. I had pounded the wall. Nobody heard me. And now here I was standing in the very same yard, dripping with rainwater, my breath heavy, my heart pounding, my eyes fixed on the front door. I could see movement inside, laughter, the warm glow of lights, the life I had been robbed of. The moment the door opened, his face appeared. My son. Older now, his hair flecked with gray, but those same eyes that once looked at me with both love and something darker. His laughter died the instant he saw me. His hands trembled. He whispered my name like he was seeing a ghost. And maybe in a way he was. I took one step toward him. And that's when I noticed. The look on his face wasn't just fear. It was something else. A warning. Because there was someone else behind him, holding a shotgun. It wasn't always like this. My life used to be peaceful, quiet even. I was a widow, living in a little wooden house at the edge of the town. My son Matthew was my only child. I raised him alone after his father died in a factory accident. We were close, or so I thought. He used to come over with food, fix things around the house, and tell me about his work at the construction company. I would make him his favorite stew, and we'd laugh about the silly things we saw in town. But slowly, things began to change. First, the visits became shorter. Then he stopped smiling as much. He started answering my questions with one-word replies. I could smell alcohol on his breath more often. I thought maybe work was stressing him. But then, strangers began coming to the house when he visited. Rough-looking men with tattoos and eyes that darted around the room. They never stayed long, but the way Matthew looked at them, it made me uneasy. One evening I found an envelope stuffed with cash in his coat pocket when I was folding his laundry. He snatched it from my hands before I could say anything. His voice was sharp, almost like he was a different person. "Don't touch my things, Mother." I had never heard him speak to me like that before. Cut me deep. I decided to ignore it, thinking it was just a bad day. But soon, whispers began to float around town about Matthew. People said he was involved in something dangerous, illegal construction deals, stolen materials, even debt to men who didn't forgive easily. I wanted to believe my son was still the boy I raised, but the signs were there. Then came the night that would change everything. It was late, almost midnight. I was dozing off in my chair when I heard pounding at the door. I opened it to see Matthew, his clothes dirty, his face pale, and his eyes darting like a hunted animal. "Pack your things, Mother," he said. "Now." "Why? What's going on?" "Just do it." His voice cracked like a whip. I felt fear creep into my chest, but I still obeyed. As I was gathering my clothes, I noticed something strange. He was carrying bricks, bags of cement, and tools into the backyard. "Matthew, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just kept moving, his jaw tight. Before I could say another word, he grabbed my arm and led me outside. The night was cold, and the yard smelled of wet earth. I looked at the half-built wall in confusion. That's when I realized. It wasn't a wall for a house. It was a wall to trap me. He pushed me inside a small hollow space, barely big enough for me to stand. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Matthew, stop this. What are you doing? I'm your mother." He looked at me with tears in his eyes, but his voice was like stone. "It's the only way to keep them from hurting you. Forgive me, Mother. You'll understand one day." And then the first brick went in. I screamed, I begged, I cried until my throat burned. But brick by brick the light disappeared. The smell of cement filled my lungs. I clawed at the walls until my nails tore. The last thing I heard was his voice. "I love you, Mother." Then darkness. I don't know how long I was in there before I lost all sense of time. I thought it would be my grave. I thought I would never see the outside world again. But somehow, I did. And now, 11 years later, I was standing in front of my son, but not alone. There was a man behind him with a shotgun, and his finger was already on the trigger. The rain fell harder. My son's lips moved. "Run, Mother." And before I could take a single step, The man behind my son didn't hesitate. He raised the shotgun higher, and the cold black mouth of the barrel pointed straight at my chest. "Move," he barked. His voice was deep, the kind that rumbled through your bones. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat, hiding most of his face, but I could see the scar running from his ear to his jaw. I froze. My legs wouldn't listen to me. Matthew stepped between us, his arms out like a shield. "Put it down," my son said, his voice shaking. "She's got nothing to do with this." The man gave a low laugh. "You think I care about your sob story, Matt? The boss said anyone who sees what's coming doesn't live to talk about it." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. Boss? Coming? What had my son dragged himself and me into? Matthew turned his head slightly and met my eyes. I'd never seen that kind of desperation in him before. "Mother, go. Please." But where would I run? It was raining, it was dark, and I had nowhere else to go after being gone for 11 years. The man took a step forward, shoving Matthew aside with the shotgun's barrel. That's when instinct took over. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a rusty shovel leaning against the wall, and swung it with every ounce of strength left in my old arms. The metal made a sickening clang against his side, and he stumbled, cursing loudly. The shotgun slipped from his hands and hit the wet ground. "Run!" Matthew yelled. This time my legs moved. I bolted into the rain, my bare feet slapping against the muddy ground. The wind cut through my thin dress, but the only thing that mattered was putting distance between me and that house. Behind me, I heard shouting, the sound of boots splashing through puddles, and then the crack of gunfire. I ducked behind a wooden fence, my breath ragged. Lightning flashed, lighting up the street for just a moment, and that's when I saw him. Matthew, wrestling with the man in the mud, both of them slipping and grunting. Another man suddenly appeared from the shadows. This one was taller, wearing a long coat, and carrying something in his hand that glinted in the lightning. A knife. He moved fast, stepping toward my son. My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to scream, to run toward them, but my body wouldn't move. It was like my feet had taken root in the ground. Then Matthew's voice cut through the storm. "Mother, don't let him." But before he could finish, the taller man lunged. 11 years ago, I had thought the worst night of my life was the night my son trapped me behind that brick wall. But as I crouched in the rain watching the scene unfold, I realized that night might only have been the beginning. Back then, the world outside had no idea what was happening in our yard. My neighbors were far, the town was quiet, and no one would have suspected that behind our house, my son was building a grave for me. When the last brick was set and the cement dried, it was like the world had forgotten I existed. Inside that dark space, I learned how long a second could feel when you thought it might be your last. Sometimes I screamed until my voice gave out. Sometimes I pressed my ear against the wall and thought I heard voices, only to realize it was just my imagination. I don't know how many days I lasted before I stopped crying and started listening. That's when I noticed something strange. There were noises, faint scraping sounds, coming from the other side of the wall. They were slow, like someone digging. At first, I thought maybe Matthew had changed his mind and was trying to let me out. But the noises didn't get closer. They circled like someone was working underground. And then one night the sound stopped completely. In the silence that followed, I began to hear other things. Footsteps overhead, doors slamming, and once the sound of someone crying. A man's voice. My son's. Back in the present, the taller man with the knife was only a step away from my son. Matthew twisted in the mud, trying to push the other man off him, but he was losing. I looked around frantically. The shovel was gone. My hands were empty. All I had was the rain, the darkness, and the pounding of my heart. The taller man raised the knife high, and that's when another voice cut through the storm. A woman's voice. "Drop it, or I swear I'll put a bullet in your skull." I turned toward the sound and saw her, standing in the middle of the street, a pistol in her hands, her face hidden under the shadow of a hood. The men froze. Even Matthew stopped struggling. She took a step forward. "Let him go," she said. The taller man laughed. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" The woman tilted her head slightly, and lightning flashed again. I caught a glimpse of her face, pale skin, sharp eyes, and a scar running across her cheek. "Someone," she said. Who doesn't miss when she shoots? The taller man's smirk faded, but before he could speak, a sound echoed from the end of the street. Engines. Multiple vehicles. Their headlights cut through the rain, growing brighter. The woman's eyes widened. They found us. We have to move. Now. She looked straight at me. You come with me if you want to live. The woman's voice was steady, but her eyes kept flicking toward the approaching headlights. Whoever was in those vehicles, they weren't friends. Matthew scrambled to his feet, dripping with mud, and grabbed my arm. Mother, go with her. I can't. His words broke off, replaced by a grimace. He clutched his side, blood staining his shirt. The taller man with the knife hissed in frustration, glancing at the vehicles, then at us. We'll finish this later, he muttered, backing away into the shadows. The scar-faced man with the shotgun limped after him, clutching his ribs where I had hit him. The headlights grew brighter, slicing through the sheets of rain. The sound of engines was joined by the crunch of tires on wet gravel. The woman grabbed my hand. Move. I stumbled after her, my bare feet splashing through puddles, my breath coming in short gasps. Matthew staggered behind us. The woman led us toward a narrow alley between two old storage sheds. By the time we reached the end, the vehicles had stopped in front of the house. I could hear doors slamming and heavy boots hitting the ground. Men's voices carried over the rain, shouting orders I couldn't understand. The woman shoved open a rusty door and pushed us inside a dimly lit room. It smelled of oil and dust. There was an old table, a single chair, and a pile of crates in the corner. She closed the door quickly, then turned to us. Name's Evelyn. You've got about 60 seconds to decide whether you trust me or not. Matthew coughed, leaning against the wall. We don't have a choice, do we? Evelyn's gaze shifted to me. You're the reason they're here, you know. You being alive. That changes everything. I stared at her, my heart still racing. What do you mean? She looked toward the door, as if checking for shadows. You disappeared 11 years ago, right? They thought you were dead. But now you're a problem. A living problem. Her words felt like ice water on my skin. I didn't even know who they were, but the fear in her voice told me they weren't people you wanted knowing your name. Outside, boots pounded closer. A beam of light swept across the crack under the door. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. When I say run, you run. Don't look back. Matthew's hand found mine. Mother. I'm sorry, he whispered. Before I could ask what he meant, Evelyn kicked over one of the crates. Inside was a small tunnel, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Go, she hissed. Matthew went first, wincing from his injury. I followed, the cold earth pressing against my palms. The tunnel smelled of damp soil and rust. Behind me, Evelyn closed the crate lid and darkness swallowed us. We crawled for what felt like forever, my knees aching, my breath echoing in the tight space. At one point, I heard the door above creak open and men's voices fill the room we had just left. Then a loud bang shook the ground, a gunshot. Matthew froze ahead of me. That was inside, he whispered. Another shot. Then silence. We waited, holding our breath, until Evelyn's voice drifted down the tunnel behind us. Keep moving. We're not safe yet. The tunnel eventually opened into a small underground chamber lit by a single bulb. There were maps pinned to the walls, a metal locker in the corner, and a stack of bottled water. Evelyn dropped down from the tunnel entrance after us, brushing dirt from her jacket. Welcome to my safe house. You'll be staying here until we figure out what's next. Matthew's face was pale. And what exactly is next? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She walked over to the locker, opened it and pulled out a faded photograph. She handed it to me. It was a picture of me taken more than 11 years ago. In it, I was standing outside my old house, holding a basket of laundry. The strange thing was, I didn't remember anyone taking it. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "She knows where it is." I felt the blood drain from my face. Where what is? I asked, my voice trembling. Evelyn looked me dead in the eyes. The thing your son buried you to protect. I shook my head slowly. I don't understand. Matthew closed his eyes, leaning his head against the wall. Mother, it's time you knew the truth. But before he could say another word, there was a loud crash from above. The sound of wood splintering, followed by heavy footsteps. Evelyn's hand went to her gun. They found us. The ceiling above us groaned under heavy footsteps. Dust drifted down from the beams, sprinkling into my hair. Evelyn's pistol was already in her hands, her eyes darting between the tunnel entrance and the narrow back door of the chamber. "Both of you stay behind me," she ordered. Matthew coughed, clutching his side. "They won't stop, Evelyn. You know that." "They'll stop," she said, cocking the gun, "when they're in the ground." A loud metallic clang echoed from above. Someone had kicked over the table in the room we'd just left. Voices followed, low and urgent. One of them was deep and gruff. I froze. It was the scar-faced man with the shotgun. Another voice joined his. "Check the floor. There's a hatch here somewhere." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "They're right over us." She moved to the corner, pulling aside an old tarp to reveal another hatch in the floor. This one leading deeper underground. She yanked it open, the hinges squealing. "Down there," she said. "Go." Matthew shook his head. "If we go deeper, we'll be trapped." "They'll kill us if we stay here," she snapped. The boards above groaned again, followed by the sound of boots scraping directly over the tunnel opening we'd crawled through earlier. Evelyn didn't wait for more arguing. She grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the hatch. I dropped down into the darkness, landing on cold dirt. Matthew followed with a grunt of pain. Evelyn came last, pulling the hatch shut above her just as a beam of flashlight light swept the chamber we'd just vacated. We crouched in the dark, breathing hard. The air was damp and stale. Somewhere ahead, I could hear the faint trickle of water. "This way," Evelyn whispered, leading us through a narrow passage that curved and dipped. My fingers brushed against the walls. They weren't just dirt. They were lined with something rough, almost like stone. It felt too old to be part of Evelyn's safe house. "Where does this lead?" I whispered. Evelyn glanced back. "To something older than any of us." We moved in silence for several minutes, until the tunnel widened into a larger space. My eyes adjusted slowly to the faint light coming from a crack high above us. The chamber smelled of moss and wet stone. In the center was something strange. A mound of bricks, stacked in a careful circle. Matthew stopped dead. "No, it's still here." I stared at the bricks. They were old, crumbling at the edges, but something about them made my skin crawl. "What is it?" I asked. Evelyn looked at Matthew. "You never told her?" He swallowed hard. "I was going to. That night. The night I buried you. It wasn't just to protect you from the men I owed money to. It was because of this." I took a step closer to the mound. The bricks weren't just stacked, they were sealing something shut. The faint smell of rust and damp earth rose from them. "What's under there?" I asked. Matthew's eyes darted toward the sound of voices echoing faintly from the tunnel behind us. They were getting closer. "There's no time," Evelyn said, pulling a small crowbar from her jacket. "We have to open it." Matthew stepped forward, panic in his voice. "No. If they find it open, it's over." Evelyn ignored him and jammed the crowbar between two bricks, prying one loose with a gritty crack. Cold air poured from the gap, carrying a metallic tang. She pulled another brick, then another, until a dark hollow yawned before us. I peered inside, and saw something glinting in the dim light. Before I could make sense of it, a voice boomed from the tunnel. "Step away from the wall." Flashlights flared, blinding me. Figures poured into the chamber, guns raised. And standing at the front was the taller man with the knife. Smiling like he'd just caught us digging our own graves. The taller man with the knife stepped forward, his smile stretching unnaturally wide. The beam from his flashlight cut across my face, forcing me to squint. Well, he said slowly. 11 years, and you still managed to sniff your way back here." Evelyn raised her gun, her voice cold. "Drop the weapons and walk away." The man chuckled. "You think I came all this way to walk away?" He glanced at the mound of bricks. "You've been busy." Two of his men fanned out to the sides, weapons drawn. The scar-faced man with the shotgun limped in last, his eyes locking on me. "She's the one," he muttered to the taller man. "She's the key." My heart thudded painfully. "Key to what?" I asked. No one answered. Instead, the taller man moved closer to the mound, crouching to peer inside the hole Evelyn had made. His smile widened. It's still here. Matthew stepped forward, his voice breaking. Don't touch it. Oh, Matthew, the man said with mock sympathy. You spent all these years hiding this little treasure, burying your own mother to keep her quiet. But now, he tapped the bricks with the tip of his knife. Now it belongs to us. Evelyn took a step to block him, her gun steady. I'm not letting you open it. The man's eyes narrowed. Then I guess I'll have to kill you first. Before he could move, Matthew lunged. He slammed into the taller man, driving him back against the wall. The knife clattered to the floor. Run, mother, Matthew shouted. But there was nowhere to run. The two armed men closed in, their weapons trained on us. The scar-faced man grabbed my arm in a crushing grip. Evelyn fired. The shot cracked through the chamber, and one of the men went down, his gun skittering across the floor. The other fired back, the bullet striking the stone wall behind me with a sharp ping. In the chaos, Matthew and the taller man rolled across the floor, each trying to get the upper hand. Evelyn kicked the fallen gun toward me. Take it, she shouted. I hesitated only a moment before grabbing it. My hand shook, but I pointed it at the scar-faced man who still had my arm. Let go, I said, my voice trembling but loud. His eyes flicked from me to the mound of bricks. Then he laughed. You don't even know what you're holding. Evelyn moved toward the mound again, her hands working quickly to pull out more bricks. Keep them off me, she yelled. The taller man suddenly broke free from Matthew's grasp and sprinted toward her. Matthew grabbed him again, but the man's hand shot out and slammed against the opening in the mound. Something inside rattled. The sound was like nothing I'd heard before, metallic, hollow but deep, like it came from far below. The air in the chamber grew colder. Evelyn froze. Don't touch it again. The taller man smirked. Too late. And then, the floor beneath us trembled. It was faint at first, a gentle vibration through my knees. Then it grew stronger, until dust poured from the ceiling and the walls groaned like they were alive. What's happening? I shouted over the noise. Evelyn's face was pale. It's waking up. The scar-faced man let go of me, stepping back toward the tunnel. We're not ready for this, he said urgently. The taller man's grin faded for the first time. No, but we can't stop it now. A low, rumbling sound rose from beneath the mound, like the grinding of ancient gears. The opening Evelyn had made began to widen on its own, bricks shifting as if pushed from the inside. And then a hand emerged. It wasn't human. Its skin was dark as old iron, the fingers long and jointed in strange angles, the nails sharp like claws. It grasped the edge of the mound and began to pull itself up. Evelyn stepped back, her gun trembling. We have to leave. Now. But the taller man just watched, his eyes wide with something that looked almost like worship. When the thing's head broke the surface, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Its eyes were glowing faintly. Its mouth twisted in a smile that didn't belong on anything alive. Matthew grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the tunnel. Mother, don't look at it. Just move. But I couldn't stop staring, because the thing knew me. It looked straight into my eyes and whispered, in a voice like grinding stone, you remember. The moment it spoke, the chamber seemed to shrink around me. The rumble in its voice vibrated through my bones, pulling me into a memory I didn't know I had. You remember. I shook my head quickly. I don't know you. I've never seen you before. The thing tilted its head in a slow, unnatural motion. Not yet, but you will. Its other hand emerged from the mound, gripping the bricks with such force that they crumbled into dust. Evelyn was already pulling at my arm, trying to drag me toward the tunnel. We have to move now, she shouted. But the taller man stepped between her and the creature, his voice almost reverent. This is it, the answer. You've been down here all this time, waiting for the one who could. The creature's clawed hand shot out and gripped the man's throat before he could finish. His words dissolved into a choking gasp as it lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Evelyn shoved me toward the tunnel entrance. Don't watch. I couldn't help it. My eyes stayed fixed as the creature studied the taller man's face, and then dropped him like trash. He hit the ground hard, coughing and clawing at the dirt. The thing's glowing eyes turned back to me. You were here when it was taken. What was taken? I demanded, my voice shaking. Its smile widened. The seal. The lock. You were meant to guard it, until he broke you free. It pointed one claw toward Matthew. I turned to my son, confused and afraid. Matthew, what is it talking about? Matthew's face was pale, his jaw tight. Mother, please just go. But the creature laughed, a slow, rumbling sound. He buried you, not to protect you from men, but to keep you from remembering me. The air in the chamber thickened, heavy and damp. I could feel every hair on my arms stand on end. Evelyn had had enough. She raised her pistol and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the chamber. The bullet hit the creature's shoulder and stopped, clattering to the ground like it had hit stone. It looked down at the wound, or rather the absence of one, then slowly raised its eyes to Evelyn. You cannot kill me. The floor shook harder. Bits of rock fell from the ceiling. In the tunnel behind us, the scar-faced man and his surviving partner were already retreating, shouting to one another in panic. Matthew grabbed my arm again. Mother, if you stay here, it'll take you. But the creature's voice followed me as he pulled me toward the tunnel. You can run, but you can't outrun what's inside you. We stumbled into the narrow passage, Evelyn covering our retreat with her gun. The shaking grew stronger, a deep roar building behind us. My knees scraped against the dirt as I crawled, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. We emerged into another small chamber, this one with a ladder leading upward. Evelyn climbed first, pushing open a hatch that spilled us into the open night air. Rain still poured down, the cold hitting me like a slap after the suffocating underground. Matthew pulled me to my feet. We have to get far away from here. Evelyn shook her head. No. It's not going to stay down there. If it's awake, it'll come looking for her. Her? I asked. Why me? Evelyn's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw real fear in them. Because you're not just a victim in all this, Mrs. Carter. You're the reason it was buried in the first place. Before I could respond, a deep boom echoed from underground, shaking the wet ground beneath our feet. From the hatch we'd just climbed out of, a faint, unnatural glow began to rise into the night sky. And then, a shadow, too large to be human, passed beneath the glow. Matthew's grip on my arm tightened painfully. It's coming. I stumbled back until my shoulder hit the basement's wooden door. My breathing was uneven, and the beam of my flashlight danced over the dusty floor. The wall was still again. No more cracks. No more voices. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. I stood there for a long moment, listening. Somewhere in the corner, water dripped into an old rusted bucket. Plink plink. The sound was strangely calming, grounding me back to reality. Maybe I was just imagining things. 11 years is a long time to hold on to fear. I slowly moved the light around the basement. Everything looked the same as it had the last time I dared to come down here. Stacks of old boxes, a broken chair, and that thick smell of mold. I even spotted an old family photograph lying face down on the floor. I picked it up and turned it over. It was a picture of my younger self, standing next to my mother, her arm around my shoulder. She was smiling, but her eyes, even then, looked like they were hiding something. A chill ran through me, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. I told myself it was just memories playing tricks. I was tired, that was all. I started toward the stairs, deciding I had seen enough for one night. But as I reached the first step, I heard something faint behind me. Not a voice this time. Just a slow, steady tap, like someone's fingernails brushing against brick. I froze mid-step. The tapping stopped the instant I turned around. My flashlight beam landed back on the brick wall. It looked perfectly solid. No cracks, no movement. My throat felt dry. Hello. I called, my voice sounding much smaller than I intended. No reply. Just the faint echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. I took one cautious step toward the bricks. My shoes crunched over loose dirt on the floor. The air felt heavier now, colder, like someone had opened a door to a winter night. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the rough, dusty surface. For a moment nothing happened. Then, top, top, top. This time the sound came from inside the wall, slow and deliberate like a signal. My heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the old chair. The tapping stopped and a voice, faint, raspy, and horribly familiar, whispered through the bricks. "Why did you bury me, son?" My chest tightened. That voice. It couldn't be. My flashlight slipped in my sweaty grip, the beam shaking wildly as I tried to keep it steady. Who's there?" I stammered, though my gut already knew the answer. A low, breathy laugh seeped through the wall. "You know who it is." I stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the damp basement wall. My knees felt weak, my mind screaming for me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "You buried me here," the voice continued, each word slow, each syllable scraping like nails over stone. "And left me in the dark." My throat was tight. "That's not possible. You." 11 years, it whispered. 11 years. I counted every day. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself it was a prank, a hallucination, anything. But deep inside, the truth clawed its way to the surface. The tapping returned, louder this time, more urgent. Top, 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 top. Dust shook loose from the bricks. "Let me out, son." The basement air grew so thick it felt like I was breathing through wet cloth. I stared at the wall, the same wall I had built with my own hands over a decade ago. Back then the mortar was fresh, the bricks bright red, the cement damp beneath my trowel. I remembered laying the last brick, wiping my sweat, and telling myself it was for the best. Now the years had stained them dark. The mortar was cracked in thin lines, like veins running across a corpse's skin. The tapping quickened. Top, 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 top. Then came a muffled thud, as though something heavy had slammed into the wall from the other side. Dust rained down in small clouds. I took an involuntary step backward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught the floating dust, making it look like tiny fireflies caught in a frantic dance. Another thud shook the bricks, and I swore I saw one, just one shift ever so slightly. My chest burned from holding my breath. Then slowly, with a grinding sound like teeth being scraped along metal, a brick in the center bulged forward. It didn't fall, not yet, but the mortar around it began to crumble. "Son!" The voice came again, louder now, cutting through the wall like it was paper. "I'm coming out." The bulging brick gave a sharp crack and fell to the floor, breaking into two jagged halves. A small black opening stared back at me, dark, deep, and smelling faintly of something rotten. A pale, thin hand, the skin stretched so tightly over the bones it looked like parchment, slid out through the hole. Its fingers curled slowly, like they were remembering how to move. My scream caught in my throat. Another brick fell. Then another. The wall groaned as though it was tired of standing, and through the growing gap, a pair of milky white eyes peered at me, unblinking. The hole widened as more bricks tumbled, each one striking the floor with a dull, hollow sound. From the darkness, the pale hand stretched further, followed by an arm so thin the skin sagged in folds, clinging to the sharp bones beneath. The smell hit me next, a stench so heavy and sour it felt like it was coating the inside of my mouth. My stomach clenched, and bile burned my throat. The wall, my wall, collapsed in a slow, dreadful cascade. Through the dust and falling debris, a figure emerged, hunched, brittle-looking, yet somehow steady on its feet. Her hair, or what was left of it, hung in thin, uneven strands, clinging to a face that had been gnawed by time. Her lips were cracked and bloodless, pulled into something between a smile and a grimace. And her eyes, they were fixed on me, clouded but burning with an impossible sharpness. My knees weakened. "Mother," I whispered, my voice shaking like a child's. She took one step forward, bare feet scraping on the concrete. The sound echoed in the silence, scraping through my ears and into my spine. "You thought 11 years would keep me in," she rasped, each word a labored effort. But the wall was never strong enough. I stumbled backward until my shoulder blades pressed against the damp basement door. My hands fumbled for the handle, slick with sweat. She kept coming, slow, deliberate, and steady, dragging something behind her that made a wet, dragging noise on the floor. The air seemed to grow colder with each step she took. "You built it to hide me," she said, tilting her head at an unnatural angle. "But walls crumble." Her shadow stretched over me, swallowing the light. And then I saw what she was dragging. It was the same trowel I had used to seal her away, its blade rusted, the handle cracked. But there was something else, a thin trail of dark, wet streaks smeared along the floor where she had walked. She stopped just inches from me. I could hear her breath, shallow, rattling, and smelling of dirt and decay. Her lips twitched. "Your turn." Her words hung in the air like a curse, heavy and slow, settling deep into my bones. I could feel my heartbeat thudding against my ribs, each pulse a loud, panicked drum in the suffocating silence. The dim bulb in the hallway above swung slightly, casting shadows that swayed across her face, making her look like she was flickering between the living and the dead. She didn't lunge. She didn't hurry. She just stood there, breathing in shallow, rattling bursts, as if every inhale scraped the inside of her lungs. Her gaze never left mine. Those eyes, glassy yet piercing, seemed to strip away every layer of courage I had ever built. The trowel in her hand tilted forward, and I saw the way the rust had eaten into the metal, leaving jagged edges like teeth. A drop of thick, dark liquid clung to its tip before it fell to the floor with a sound far too loud for such a small thing. I knew, without wanting to know, that it wasn't just rust coating that blade. The smell grew stronger, like damp earth and old rot. It carried with it a strange, bitter sweetness that made my throat tighten. I realized with a creeping dread that it was the smell of someone, who had been shut away too long. Her lips cracked as she spoke again, the sound like paper tearing. "You never thought about the nights I stayed awake," she whispered. "Counting, waiting, listening." The way she said listening made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She leaned closer, enough for me to see the faint outline of her teeth, yellowed, uneven, and too many for the width of her mouth. I felt my back press harder against the door. My hand searched desperately for the handle, but the metal seemed to swim under my sweat-slick fingers. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to run, but my legs were frozen, as if her stare had rooted me to the spot. "You thought the wall would hold," she continued, almost tender now, "but walls, they have ears. And I heard everything." She tilted her head the other way, the movement jerky and unnatural, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tight. The bulb above flickered again, and in that momentary flash, I thought I saw more shapes in the darkness behind the broken wall. Shapes that were shifting, breathing, waiting. The trowel scraped against the floor as she lifted it. The sound was slow, deliberate, a whisper of metal on concrete that slid straight into my spine. Then she smiled, not wide, not friendly, just enough to let me see that this was no hallucination. She had come back. And she wasn't alone. Her voice still echoed in my ears, low and gravelly, as if it had been dragged across 11 years of darkness. It wasn't the kind of voice you could simply hear. It was the kind that slipped under your skin and made a home in your bones. My throat felt tight, my tongue like a stone. Every part of me wanted to move, to scream, to break the spell, but she stood there, frozen in place yet somehow pressing forward without taking a single step. The hallway between us seemed to shrink, the walls inching closer, narrowing until the space felt like a coffin we were both trapped inside. The faint swinging of the light bulb above threw her shadow across the peeling wallpaper. But it wasn't just one shadow. For the briefest moment, I saw several thin, bent figures stretching unnaturally along the walls, twitching, as if the light couldn't decide how many of her there actually were. Her hair hung in clumps, some strands matted together with something darker than dust. And then I noticed her hands, pale, almost translucent, but lined with deep cracks that oozed a thin reddish-black sheen. In her right hand, she clutched the trowel like a priest holds a holy relic, except her worship was of something far more terrible. The smell rolled over me in slow, invisible waves, damp stone mold and the stale, almost sweet stench of something that had been buried far too long. My stomach twisted, my mind flashing unbidden images of rotting wood and sunken graves. "You counted days," she murmured, her head tilting ever so slightly. "I counted heartbeats." Her words were soft, but each one landed with the weight of a hammer. Her pupils swelled until her eyes were almost entirely black, reflecting the faint, trembling light. From somewhere deep behind her, behind the broken section of wall, I heard it. A faint drag, then a pause, then another drag. Something was moving in there, slow and steady, as if pacing itself, as if it had all the time in the world. She glanced over her shoulder, a knowing smile flickering across her cracked lips. "They've missed you." The bulb above us gave one final violent flicker, And for the smallest fraction of a second, the space behind her wasn't empty. The wall pulsed as if breathing, and in the gaps between brick and plaster, thin, pale fingers curled outward, feeling their way into the open air. My hand finally found the doorknob, but it was ice cold, so cold it burned. When I tried to twist it, it didn't move. Behind me, the wood of the door groaned, as though something on my side was leaning against it. And then she stepped forward. One slow, deliberate step. The sound of her bare foot against the floor was so quiet, yet in that silence, it might as well have been thunder. My life after that strange argument with Mark took on a quiet, uneasy rhythm. On the surface, nothing seemed to have changed. The days still began with the smell of morning tea, the little garden outside still had its roses and tulips, and Mark still left for work every morning with his polished shoes and ironed shirt. But under that normal picture, something invisible was growing between us. It wasn't hatred, at least not the kind that screamed with shouting and slammed doors. It was more like a cold fog that slowly filled the house, seeping into every room. He avoided my eyes when we sat at the table. He answered my questions with short words, as if talking to me was a chore. If I asked about the bills or the repairs needed in the kitchen, he would mumble, "I'll handle it," and leave the room. Sometimes, I caught him staring at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. Not the way a son should look at his mother. It wasn't love, and it wasn't worry. It was something sharper, harder, like he was calculating. One rainy afternoon, I was folding laundry in my room when I heard voices downstairs. Mark was on the phone, speaking in a low, urgent tone. At first, I thought it was just work, maybe a business call. But then I heard words that froze my hands mid-fold. "No, she has no one else. This house will be mine completely. Just be ready when I tell you." I stood still, my ears straining. But the rain against the windows made it hard to catch the rest. The sound of his footsteps coming up the stairs sent me rushing to sit on the bed, pretending I was busy. He peeked into my room, his face unreadable. "Need anything?" he asked. I shook my head, and he closed the door without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying his voice, that cold certainty in his tone. What did he mean by mine completely? I had lived in this house for more than 30 years. My late husband and I had built it together brick by brick. Surely he wouldn't. The next few days, Mark seemed unusually polite. He brought me tea in the morning, asked if I wanted anything from the store, even offered to help me prune the rose bushes. But the politeness felt rehearsed, like an actor playing a part. It made me more uneasy, not less. One Sunday he suggested we clear out the basement. "There's too much old junk down there," he said with a forced smile. "We can make better use of the space." I hesitated. That basement held decades of memories. My wedding dress, my children's old toys, boxes of photographs. But he was insistent, so I agreed, thinking maybe it would be good to organize things. We spent the morning moving boxes, dust rising in the air. Mark worked quickly, almost too quickly, piling things in a corner. At one point he asked me to check something upstairs, saying he needed to measure a wall. I didn't think much of it, until I returned and saw him staring at one section of the basement wall with a strange look in his eyes. "Everything all right?" I asked. He smiled too quickly. "Yeah, just thinking of some renovations. This space could be perfect for storage." I didn't know it then, but that wall, that ordinary gray wall, would soon change my life forever. Days passed, and he didn't bring up the basement again. But I noticed he spent more time down there when I wasn't around. At night, I sometimes heard faint scraping sounds from below, like someone moving bricks. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said it was just the pipes. It was during one of those quiet, ordinary afternoons, the kind that seemed harmless, that the first true shadow of danger crept in. I was in the kitchen making soup when I heard the front door open and close. Mark wasn't due home yet. I wiped my hands, peeked into the hallway and froze. A man I had never seen before was standing there, his clothes dusty, his hands rough. He glanced at me, then at the basement door, and said in a low voice, "He said you'd be ready." I sat quietly by the window that evening, my fingers working slowly on a piece of knitting I had started days ago. The soft hum of the wind outside and the faint rustle of leaves gave the room a gentle calm, almost as if the world had forgotten the storms that once raged in this house. Life with Henry had changed over the years. He wasn't the cheerful little boy I once carried on my back. He had grown into a man with secrets, heavy ones, the kind that pressed into a person's soul and changed the way they looked at the world. Sometimes I caught him staring at me with a strange expression. Not anger exactly, but something colder, like he was studying me, measuring something in his mind. I always brushed it off. After all, he was my son. I had carried him for 9 long months, endured sleepless nights just to keep him fed, and prayed countless prayers over his life. A mother's heart, I told myself, should always trust her child. One afternoon, while I was watering the small garden at the back of the house, I overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, urgent, and although I could only catch fragments, one phrase cut through the air like a blade. "She's in the way, we need to finish this soon." I froze, the watering can still in my hand. Who was she? Surely it couldn't be me. I tried to shake the thought from my head, but my heart felt heavy. That night, I barely slept. I could hear him pacing in the living room long after midnight, his footsteps slow and deliberate. At one point, he stopped directly outside my bedroom door, and for a full minute, all I heard was his breathing. The next morning, he was unusually kind. He made me breakfast, even buttered the toast just the way I liked it. But there was something about the way he placed the plate in front of me. Too gentle, almost like it was a farewell gesture. In the days that followed, I noticed something odd. He had started bringing bricks into the house, not just 1 or 2, but stacks of them. He claimed he was repairing the outer wall of the garage, but when I peeked outside, the garage wall looked perfectly fine. I didn't want to pry, but my instincts began to whisper warnings I could no longer ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, I heard a muffled sound in the basement, a steady thud, 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 as if someone was hammering or building something. I crept halfway down the basement stairs and peered into the dim light. What I saw made my stomach twist. Henry was there, sweat dripping from his forehead, arranging bricks in a strange formation against one side of the basement wall. "Henry," I called softly, pretending my voice was casual. "What are you doing down there?" He froze for a moment, then looked up at me with that same unreadable expression. "Just fixing up some cracks, Mom. Don't worry about it." But I did worry. I worried more than I had ever done in my life. And I couldn't shake the feeling that those bricks weren't meant to fix anything. They were meant to hide something. Or someone. I didn't know then that the someone was me.